March 1915, inside a British cordite factory in Waltham Abbey, Essex. Supervisor James Morrison watched workers blend nitrocellulose with nitroglycerin, kneading the paste into cords that would fill naval shells. The mixture required one critical ingredient to achieve proper consistency: acetone. Without it, the nitrocellulose wouldn't dissolve. Without dissolution, there was no cordite. Without cordite, artillery shells were useless metal tubes. Morrison checked the acetone reserves, 2 weeks remaining at current production rates. He sent an urgent telegram to the Ministry of Munitions. The response shocked him. Britain had no solution. While the Royal Navy commanded the seas with dreadnoughts, while British factories stamped out millions of shell casings, while the British Empire controlled a quarter of the world's land surface, the entire war machine was grinding toward a halt because of a colorless liquid that smelled vaguely of fruit. British artillery was firing 100,000 shells daily on the Western Front. Each shell required cordite propellant. Each ton of cordite required 40 gallons of acetone. Britain needed 3,000 tons of acetone monthly to maintain ammunition production. Current British production capacity: barely 100 tons monthly from wood distillation processes that required German patents Britain could no longer access. Germany controlled global acetone supply through superior wood distillation technology developed before the war. German chemists had perfected the destructive distillation of hardwoods, extracting acetone alongside methanol and other valuable chemicals. Britain had depended on German imports. When war began in August 1914, those imports stopped instantly. Winston Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty, convened emergency meetings at the Admiralty House. British chemists proposed every known method. Calcium acetate, destructive distillation, produced acetone but released toxic fumes and operated inefficiently. Synthetic chemistry routes existed theoretically, but required years to develop and scale. Importing from America was possible, but German U-boats were already sinking cargo ships in the Atlantic. The invisible crisis deepened. No dramatic battles marked this threat. No newspaper headlines warned of acetone shortages. Yet without this solvent, Britain's ammunition production would cease within months. The greatest navy in history would run out of shells not from enemy action, but from chemistry. But in a laboratory at the University of Manchester, a 40-year-old biochemist born in the Russian Pale of Settlement was cultivating bacteria that produced acetone as a waste product, though he wasn't trying to make acetone at all. Chaim Weizmann was born November 27, 1874 in Motol, Russian Empire, now Belarus, third of 15 children in a timber merchant's family. The Jewish Pale of Settlement meant restricted rights, periodic pogroms, and limited opportunities. But Weizmann showed aptitude for chemistry early. He studied in Germany and Switzerland, earning his doctorate from the University of Fribourg in 1899. By 1904, he'd immigrated to England, securing a position as lecturer at the University of Manchester, eventually becoming reader in biochemistry. His research focused on fermentation processes, specifically producing butanol through bacterial action. Butanol, or butyl alcohol, was needed for synthetic rubber production and industrial solvents. Weizmann's innovation involved using Clostridium acetobutylicum bacteria to ferment starch sources, corn and potatoes primarily, into useful chemicals. Between 1910 and 1914, he refined the process in his Manchester laboratory, publishing papers on bacterial fermentation. But the process was stubborn. For every fermentation batch, the bacteria produced 3 distinct products in fixed ratios: 6 parts butanol, 3 parts acetone, 1 part ethanol. The acetone was a nuisance, a waste product Weizmann initially tried to minimize. He wanted butanol. The acetone was just something to discard. In early 1915, through his involvement in Manchester's Zionist community, Weizmann learned of Britain's acetone crisis. His waste product was exactly what Churchill desperately needed. Through C.P. Scott, editor of the Manchester Guardian, Weizmann contacted the Admiralty. The meeting came quickly. Weizmann demonstrated his fermentation process to Churchill and Admiral Frederick Tudor. He could produce acetone from any starch source: corn, potatoes, grain, even chestnuts. The bacteria were already isolated, the process already proven at laboratory scale. Churchill leaned forward. "Can you scale this to industrial production?" Weizmann considered the question. Given facilities, feedstock, and resources, yes. The British government gave Weizmann complete authority. Within months, he would transform Britain's entire acetone supply chain. But the feedstock problem was just beginning. Laboratory fermentation and industrial production were entirely different problems. Weizmann could make liters in glass flasks. Britain needed millions of gallons monthly. The bacteria were finicky. Wrong temperature killed them. Wrong acidity killed them. Contamination from competing microorganisms killed entire batches. And Britain didn't have enough corn. The government converted the Nicholson Gin Distillery in London into the first acetone facility. Other distilleries in King's Lynn and Poole followed. Each required massive fermentation vats, temperature control systems, and sterile environments. Revolutionary concepts for 1915. Workers accustomed to making gin now learned microbiology. Weizmann's process worked in 6 steps. First, mash corn or potatoes into liquid solution. Second, sterilize with steam to kill competing bacteria. Third, inoculate with Clostridium acetobutylicum cultures. Fourth, ferment 36 to 48 hours at precisely 37 degrees Celsius, human body temperature. Fifth, distill to separate acetone, butanol, and ethanol. Sixth, purify acetone to 99.5% concentration for cordite production. But Britain didn't grow enough corn domestically. Imports came from the United States and Canada. German U-boats were sinking cargo ships. By September 1917, Britain was desperately low on corn. Weizmann suggested an alternative: horse chestnuts, the conqueror's children collected from trees each autumn. They contained sufficient starch. The government launched a public campaign. Help win the war, collect chestnuts. Schools mobilized. Boy Scout troops gathered fallen chestnuts by the sackful. Civic groups organized collection points. Children across Britain delivered chestnuts to railway stations. The target was 3,000 tons. Each ton of chestnuts yielded approximately 30 gallons of acetone. By 1917, Weizmann's factories were producing 30,000 tons of acetone annually, supplying Britain's entire cordite production. Canada built a major fermentation plant in Toronto with abundant corn supplies. Safer from submarine attacks, the process scaled from 100-liter laboratory vats to 50,000-liter industrial tanks. By 1918, virtually every British shell fired contained acetone from Weizmann's bacteria. But the chemist who saved Britain's ammunition supply wanted payment of a different kind. The British government offered Weizmann financial compensation, honors, a title perhaps. David Lloyd George, Prime Minister by December 1916, asked directly what Weizmann wanted as reward for saving Britain's ammunition production. Weizmann declined money. He wanted something else entirely: British support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Throughout the war, Weizmann had balanced 2 roles. By day, he managed industrial acetone production, troubleshooting fermentation batches and training workers. By evening, he lobbied British leadership for the Zionist cause. He was president of the English Zionist Federation. His access to Churchill, Lloyd George, and Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour gave him opportunities other Zionist leaders lacked. The political context aligned. The Ottoman Empire, controlling Palestine, had allied with Germany. Britain wanted post-war influence in the Middle East to protect the Suez Canal and secure access to oil. Jewish immigration to Palestine had been growing since the 1880s. The Zionist movement sought international recognition and protection. On November 2, 1917, Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour issued a declaration addressed to Lord Rothschild. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. Did Weizmann's acetone work directly cause the Balfour Declaration? Lloyd George himself answered that question in his 1936 memoir. He wrote that acetone was essential to cordite manufacture, that Weizmann's genius found the practical method for producing it in quantity, and that, when he offered Weizmann recognition, the chemist replied, "There is nothing I want for myself." Lloyd George asked if there was nothing Britain could do. Weizmann answered, "Yes, I would like you to do something for my people." He explained his aspirations for Jewish repatriation to Palestine. Lloyd George stated plainly, that was the fount and origin of the famous declaration. Multiple factors influenced the declaration. British strategic interests in the Middle East were primary, but Weizmann's acetone work gave him credibility and access that made the declaration possible when it happened. The ABE fermentation process, acetone, butanol, ethanol, became the foundation for an entire industry beyond explosives. While acetone saved Britain in World War I, butanol, the primary product Weizmann had originally sought, revolutionized multiple sectors. Butanol proved superior for lacquers and automotive paints, essential for synthetic rubber production, critical as a plasticizer in early polymers, and ideal for brake fluids due to its high boiling point and low freezing point. After the war, Commercial Solvents Corporation, founded in 1919, licensed Weizmann's patents and built massive fermentation plants in Terre Haute, Indiana. By the 1920s, it was the world's largest butanol producer. In Britain, the Distillers Company Limited took over wartime facilities and continued commercial production. At peak production during the 1930s and 1940s, fermentation supplied 66% of the world's butanol and 2/3 of industrial solvents in North America. The scale was extraordinary, hundreds of millions of gallons annually, requiring enormous quantities of corn and molasses. When World War II began, acetone shortages threatened again. Weizmann's process, now 25 years refined, supplied Allied acetone needs through ramped-up British, American, and Canadian plants. The process proved reliable and essential, though less critical than in World War I, since synthetic alternatives had emerged. But by the 1950s, petroleum-based synthetic chemistry began replacing fermentation. The Cumene process produced acetone cheaper from petrochemicals. The OXO process made butanol from propylene. Fermentation couldn't compete economically with petroleum derivatives. It required huge amounts of agricultural feedstock, was more labor-intensive, and operated in batches versus continuous chemical synthesis. The last major fermentation plants closed in the 1960s and 1970s in Western countries. The 21st century brought renewed interest. Peak oil concerns, sustainability demands, and biofuel potential made biological processes attractive again. China operates ABE fermentation plants today. Researchers engineer bacteria for higher yields. Weizmann's bacteria, once obsolete, are relevant again as petroleum runs scarce. After World War I, Weizmann devoted himself primarily to the Zionist cause. He served as president of the World Zionist Organization from 1920 to 1931 and again from 1935 to 1946. He negotiated with British authorities during the Mandate period, advocated for Jewish immigration to Palestine, raised funds for settlements and infrastructure, and founded the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 1925. In 1934, he established the Daniel Seif Research Institute in Rehovot, later renamed the Weizmann Institute of Science. Jewish immigration to Palestine increased through the 1920s and 1930s. The Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939 challenged British rule. World War II and the Holocaust intensified urgency for Jewish refuge. In 1947, the United Nations voted to partition Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. On May 14, 1948, Israel declared independence. On February 16, 1949, Chaim Weizmann became the first president of Israel, a largely ceremonial role, but symbolically crucial. He served until his death on November 9, 1952, in Rehovot, age 77. The popular narrative claims Weizmann's acetone work led directly to Israel's creation. The reality is more nuanced. His acetone work gave him credibility and access to British leadership. Lloyd George and Balfour explicitly credited his contribution when supporting the Balfour Declaration. The timing in 1917 was influenced by Britain's gratitude, but the Zionist movement had many leaders. British strategic interests in the Middle East were the primary driver. The path from the 1917 Declaration to 1948 statehood involved decades of conflict, negotiation, migration, and politics. The Holocaust and World War II were proximate causes of statehood timing. The honest assessment: Weizmann's acetone work was necessary, but not sufficient. It provided leverage and timing for the Balfour Declaration. Transforming that declaration into an actual state required 30 more years and countless other factors. A Russian Jewish chemist trying to make synthetic rubber accidentally produced a waste product that saved the British Empire, which gave him leverage to advocate for a Jewish state, which honored him by naming its premier scientific institute after him, where researchers now improve the fermentation process he invented, because petroleum, which replaced his bacteria, is running out. Weizmann wanted to make rubber solvents. Instead, he made ammunition, fortunes, and a country. Not through planning, but through bacteria, biochemistry, and being in the right laboratory at the right moment in history.